My name is Emily Hartman, and when I handed my smug sister Mallory a box on her birthday, she rolled her eyes, until Andrew stepped off that yacht behind me and the color drained from her face. I'd warned them not to underestimate him, but now they had front-row seats to the lesson. Before we get into this wild ride of love, class, and betrayal, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story reaches. It was a golden Sunday morning in Los Angeles, the kind that made everything look softer, sweeter, more forgiving than it really was. My parents' Spanish-style bungalow in Westwood shimmered in the heat, trimmed roses blooming neatly along the front walk, as if they too were posing for judgment. Inside, the dining table was set for brunch, though set was a generous term. There was no centerpiece, no cloth napkins, just store-brand muffins and a half-hearted fruit platter sweating in the sun slicing through the window. I'd hoped for more, something warm, even vaguely welcoming, but I knew better than to expect it. Still, I pressed my hand to my chest and cleared my throat. "Everyone," I began, my voice bright with effort, "I'd like you all to meet someone important. My fiancé, Andrew, is arriving next weekend. He's from a well-known family in New York, old money, very old, and I really hope you'll make a good impression." The silence that followed should have told me everything. Jade, my older sister by 2 years, with the world's most curated Instagram and an ego to match, snorted into her mimosa. "A fiancé," she repeated with faux surprise, arching an eyebrow. Mallory, our baby sister with a bite sharper than her eyeliner, leaned back in her chair and let out a theatrical laugh. "Wait, did you say from an aristocratic family? Sounds like a prince. Will he be arriving on a unicorn, or does he prefer dragons?" Even my father, usually gruff and disengaged, cracked a smirk. I looked to my mother, silently begging for backup. She just sipped her decaf like she hadn't heard a word. A familiar flush crept up my neck. Not embarrassment, anger, cold and bitter like an overdue bill. They hadn't even met him and already they'd decided he was a joke. Or worse, that I was. "I'm serious," I said, softer this time. "We met through work and yes, he comes from money, but he's kind, he's thoughtful. I want him to feel welcomed here." "And he said yes to this." Jade motioned lazily toward the table, toward the house, toward us. "Wow, either he's incredibly in love or incredibly weird." "Maybe both," Mallory added, grinning. I tried to laugh, I even managed a tight smile. But inside, my stomach was doing somersaults. It wasn't just their words, it was their tone. The way Jade curled her lip when she said fiancé, like the word didn't quite belong to me. The way Mallory glanced at our parents, seeking approval for her mockery. The way no one asked a single question about Andrew. I shouldn't have been surprised. Growing up, I was the quiet one, the pleaser, the middle child who always smoothed things over. Jade was the golden girl with the Ivy League diploma and real estate license. Mallory, the wild card with tattoos and a modeling contract she waved around like a shield. I was just Emily, the art teacher with a sensible car and a savings account. But now I had Andrew. And suddenly that changed everything, at least in their eyes. And maybe, just maybe in mine too. I stood up from the table, needing space. "Anyway," I said briskly, "he'll be here next weekend. We'll do dinner, just try, okay?" I didn't wait for a response. As I walked down the hallway toward my childhood room, I caught a fragment of whispered laughter. "If he's rich, why would he want someone like Emily?" That one landed deep. The kind of sentence that slides under your skin and stays there humming. But I didn't cry. I sat on my bed, staring at the patch of ceiling where my glow-in-the-dark stars still clung from high school. And I made myself a promise I would show them. Not with speeches or fights, with poise, with presence, with the man they'd all just mocked. And when he walked into this house next weekend, no unicorn needed, they'd choke on every snide word they'd ever spoken. That evening, the house was dimly lit, the kind of half-darkness that made the wallpaper look even more tired than usual. I'd stayed out longer than I needed to, walking the block twice after my errands just to delay coming back. I didn't feel like confronting the awkwardness, the passive judgment, the low-grade humiliation that came with being home these days. But I had to do this. I had to try. The kitchen still smelled faintly of overbrewed coffee and reheated casserole. My mother stood at the counter, her arms elbow-deep in sudsy water, washing the same mug for what had to be the 5th time. My father sat at the small breakfast table, his tablet glowing with the dull light of some local news stream, his glasses slipping low on his nose. I stepped in quietly, clutching the edge of my cardigan with both hands. My voice came out softer than I intended, like I was asking for something I didn't quite deserve. Hey, can we talk for a second? Neither looked up. My mother set the mug on the drying rack with a clink. I just wanted to ask about dinner next weekend, when Andrew comes. Silence. I cleared my throat and pushed forward, even though my stomach was already twisting. I don't need anything fancy, I said quickly, preemptively. Just could we make it nice? Like set the table, maybe cook something you know how to do well. That chicken with lemon and rosemary, maybe. He doesn't need anything extravagant, but I want him to feel like this is a home. You know, my mother finally turned around, wiping her hands on a towel with slow, deliberate movements. We'll do what we can, she said, but the words were so vague they felt like dust in my hands. Not a yes, not a no, not anything at all. I mean it's just dinner, she added with a little shrug. He's not royalty. I didn't say he was, I replied, forcing a smile. Dad snorted under his breath. If the boy's from money, he probably eats like a king every night. Why waste our budget trying to impress someone who probably wipes his shoes with our salary? Robert, Mom said mildly, but she didn't disagree. I tried again. It's not about impressing him. It's about showing some respect, about making a good impression. He's important to me. He finally looked up from his tablet then, adjusting his glasses, his expression unreadable. And what are you hoping to prove, Emily? That question, it caught me off guard. I'm not trying to prove anything. Could have fooled me, he muttered. I swallowed hard. I just want you to meet him, that's all. My mother turned back to the sink. The sound of running water filled the silence. Well, we'll see what we can do, she said again. I'm not promising a banquet. I'm not asking for one. I left before my voice cracked, my hands cold even though the kitchen was warm. I walked down the hallway to the guest room, formerly mine, and shut the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a wrinkle out of the blanket, thinking about all the times I'd imagined this moment. Introducing Andrew to my family had once felt like a milestone, a celebration. But in this house, nothing felt like celebration. Only careful negotiation. Fragile hope. Muted expectation. I thought of Andrew's laugh. The way he called me Hartman when I got too serious, his teasing grin that could undo hours of tension. I hadn't told him everything about my family, just enough to know he should come in with humility, not fanfare. But still, he deserved more than cold lasagna and paper napkins. He deserved warmth, curiosity, basic hospitality. And yet, deep down, I knew better. My family didn't perform warmth. They didn't know how, especially not for me. They'd give Mallory a full brunch spread just because she showed up in heels. They threw a backyard party when Jade landed that real estate award, complete with catered tacos and overpriced wine. But me, I asked for a meal and got budget warnings. I rubbed my temples and stared at the old bookshelf still sitting in the corner, dusty with forgotten yearbooks and abandoned trophies. I'd never been the loud one. Never been the problem. And maybe that was the problem. They just didn't see me. But they were about to. Andrew wasn't just coming for dinner. He was walking into a theater of small, cutting performances, and he had no idea. But neither did they. And I couldn't decide which part scared me more. The sun was just beginning to dip below the San Gabriel Mountains as I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home in Pasadena, nerves churning my stomach into knots. It was dinner day. I'd arrived an hour early, partly to help, partly to beg. I clutched a grocery bag filled with a bottle of chilled wine, a bouquet of white tulips Andrew had bought for my mom, and a small lemon tart from a French bakery he loved. Just a few gestures, hoping to soften the edge. As I opened the front door, the sharp scent of something burned immediately hit me. Not subtle. Acrid. Definitely not chicken with rosemary. The oven timer beeped in the background unattended. The kitchen was smoky. I blinked. The lasagna, a dish my mom made only under duress, was blackened along the edges, bubbling aggressively, cheese crisped to an unnatural orange. No side salad. No bread. No tablecloth. Just a stack of disposable plates in the middle of the scratched dining table, next to a roll of paper towels and a half-empty can of root beer. This couldn't be real. Mom, I called gently, stepping into the kitchen. She appeared a few seconds later, wiping her hands on her jeans. You're early. I thought I'd help finish setting up, she shrugged. Nothing much to finish. I looked around again, hoping I'd missed something, hoping maybe they'd forgotten the real setup in the living room or on the patio. But no, this was it. The table looked like a rushed birthday party for a 6-year-old. The only centerpiece was an unopened bottle of ketchup and a crumpled flyer from a local pizza place. "Where's the good silverware?" I asked. My mom let out a sigh like I was the one being unreasonable. "Emily, it's just dinner." My voice dropped. "But he's coming in less than an hour." And I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, burnt lasagna, paper plates. No effort, they hadn't even cleared the TV trays off the couch. I heard laughter from the living room. Jade and Mallory were sprawled across the sectional, both in sweatpants, sharing a bag of chips and watching a dating show. Mallory looked over at me, eyes flicking to the flowers in my hand. "Oh, good decor," she said with a smirk. Jade tossed a chip in her mouth and added, "So are we pretending to be impressed, or are we just being ourselves?" I moved toward them slowly, pressing my lips together. "Could you at least get dressed, like put on jeans something?" Mallory gave a long, theatrical stretch. "Why, he's rich, right? He won't care," Jade chimed in. "If he's so classy, he'll appreciate authenticity. Isn't that what they say in the magazines?" I stood frozen, watching the two people who shared my childhood, now smirking at my life like it was some B-grade sitcom. "He's not coming here to be impressed," I said quietly. "He's coming to meet his future family," Mallory scoffed. "Relax, if he really loves you, a little mess won't scare him off." The worst part? They didn't say it with malice. It was worse than that. They said it with disinterest. Like my engagement was just an awkward social obligation they had to endure until something better came along, like dessert, or a new episode of whatever dating show they were watching. I turned and walked back into the kitchen, focusing on placing the flowers in an old chipped vase I found under the sink. My hands shook slightly as I arranged the stems. I knew it wasn't about the food or the plates. It was the message behind it all. "You're not worth trying for." I took a deep breath and glanced at the oven timer. 20 minutes. Andrew was never late, neither was the truth. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock. My heart skipped. Not in the sweet, fluttery way, but in that deep, bracing way when you're about to throw someone you love into a room full of wolves and hope they smile through the bite. I rushed to the door, brushing invisible crumbs from my blouse, suddenly regretting the wine-colored silk top I'd chosen. It felt too much now, too hopeful in a room that had offered none. I opened the door and froze. Andrew stood on the porch, cheeks a little flushed from the cool Pasadena breeze, curls slightly tousled under his helmet. He had come on a bicycle, a bike, in jeans, and a plain navy shirt. No blazer, no watch, no polished leather shoes. My stomach dropped. He held out a modest bouquet of pink and white peonies, the paper still damp from the florist's spray. "I thought these might brighten the room," he said with a grin. "They reminded me of your kindness." And just like that, just with those two sentences, I remembered why I loved him. Even still, I glanced over his shoulder, praying none of my family had seen the bike leaning against our crooked mailbox. Andrew noticed. "Relax," he murmured, slipping his hand into mine. "I've been in worse rooms. I'll survive this one." His voice had that warm undercurrent, like melted chocolate and good intentions, and for a moment it steadied me, but only for a moment. I led him inside. The living room had not changed. The TV was still on. Jade didn't even mute it. Mallory, barefoot, threw a glance toward the door and took in the bouquet with exaggerated curiosity. "Flowers," she said. "Classy." My dad appeared from the hallway, tucking his phone into his pocket, and gave Andrew a once-over that was far from subtle. "So no limo today?" he asked, voice dry as overcooked toast. Andrew, to his credit, didn't miss a beat. "Nope, just my legs and a solid Schwinn. Best way to clear your head after a long week." My dad blinked. "You biked, from where?" "From the guest house I'm renting over near Echo Park, about 9 miles. Mallory gave a low whistle. "So you're a minimalist and an overachiever." Andrew smiled. "More like traffic avoidant." He handed the peonies to my mother, who looked caught off guard. "Peonies?" she murmured. "Haven't seen these in a while." "They're her favorite," he said, nodding at me. "Though I may be biased, I think everything looks better in her hands." The room stilled. Jade rolled her eyes, my father coughed. Mallory muttered something under her breath that I thankfully didn't catch. Andrew didn't flinch. "I hope I'm not overdressed," he added lightly, motioning to his jeans. I wasn't sure of the vibe. I nearly melted. Not from embarrassment, from relief, he knew. Ooh, and he was playing it cool. Not in the way that mocked, in the way that softened the tension without pretending it wasn't there. My mother finally moved, setting the flowers in the same chipped vase I'd used earlier. "We're just casual around here," she said. Perfect, Andrew replied. I brought an appetite and no expectations. A beat, and then surprisingly, Jade laughed. It wasn't a mocking laugh, more like confused amusement. All right, Bike Prince, she said. Let's see if you survive the lasagna. I stood there in the entryway, stunned, because just like that, the mood shifted, not fully, not warmly, but enough. Andrew had walked into a room built to judge him and met it with calm, not defensiveness, not performance, just ease, and maybe that's what disarmed them. He didn't act rich, he didn't act offended, he didn't act anything. And somehow, that was the most powerful thing he could have done. And watching him stand in my parents' mismatched dining room, complimenting the worn tile floor and asking about the old family photos on the wall, I felt a quiet bloom of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel all day. Hope. We gathered around the dining table, if you could call it that. No cloth, just the glossy fake wood and a ring of watermarks that had never come out. My mother placed the lasagna in the center, still blackened around the edges, and everyone began serving themselves on flimsy paper plates that folded under the slightest pressure. Andrew, ever gracious, complimented the smoky flavor. I watched him, studied him, clung to every charming word he offered like it was a life preserver. My family, for once, was quiet. Maybe it was the food. Maybe they were still sizing him up. Maybe they were just waiting for the moment to pounce. Mallory was the first to break the silence. So Andrew, she said, twirling her plastic fork like she was hosting a game show, what exactly do you do? He smiled, completely unfazed. I work with a nonprofit that develops community gardens in urban neighborhoods. We also manage small-scale food justice grants for local schools. Mallory blinked. So you're a gardener? Sometimes, depends on the week. Jade leaned in slightly, her eyes narrowing just enough to signal the next strike. But you said you're from an aristocratic family, right? Shouldn't you be managing some sort of empire, trust funds, family estates, yachts in Monaco? There it was. My mother didn't miss her cue either. She looked up from her plate, her voice sugary with curiosity. So, she asked, what's in your trust fund? Millions. The question floated in the air like a balloon filled with something toxic. Andrew set down his fork gently, not even blinking. I suppose that depends on how you count wealth. It was the perfect answer, measured, graceful, just vague enough to be polite and just firm enough to shut it down. But of course, Mallory couldn't resist. So that's a no. Her tone was dipped in sarcasm, but Andrew only chuckled softly. That's a none of your business, said in the kindest possible way. Even I couldn't help smiling at that. But my mother frowned, clearly not pleased that her curiosity had been deflected. My father remained mostly quiet, occasionally sipping from his glass and watching Andrew like a hawk. He hadn't said much, but his silence spoke volumes. I tried to redirect. Andrew's actually lived in 5 countries. He has this story about getting stranded in Morocco that always cracks me up. Oh no, Andrew groaned, playing along. Do not let her bait me into telling the camel story. That got a small chuckle out of Jade. Even Mallory cracked a grin. I ran with it. Seriously, he had to convince a stranger to help him fix a broken-down rental car in the middle of the desert. No cell service, no GPS, just him and his high school French. I'm convinced the only reason I survived, Andrew added, was because I looked pathetic enough to pity. So, Jade said, tilting her head, you travel, you garden, and you charm Middle Eastern strangers. But you're not loaded. Is that the gist? Andrew paused, then looked at her directly. I guess you could say I grew up with money, but I try not to let money raise me. I looked around the table. That quiet line landed harder than anything else he'd said all evening. Mallory picked at the corner of her paper plate. Jade didn't reply. My parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. The silence was different now, not frozen, but uncertain. They didn't know what to make of him. He didn't fit in any of their categories. And that confused them. Which was, frankly, perfect. Still, beneath the light jokes and measured calm, I could feel it, that simmer, that waiting tension. They hadn't accepted him, not really. They were still hunting, just in subtler ways now. But what they didn't know was that Andrew had weathered worse. And so had I. The plates were mostly cleared, save for the sticky remains of overcooked brownies and half-melted ice cream sliding into syrupy pools. The peonies Andrew brought had started to droop slightly in their chipped vase, fitting, I thought, for how the evening had sagged under the weight of judgment, pettiness, and what wasn't said out loud. Andrew stood slowly brushing invisible crumbs from his jeans. Thank you for dinner, he said politely, looking around the room. It was memorable. He turned to me and with a small smile only I seemed to understand reached for my hand. His touch was warm, steady. You were brilliant tonight, he whispered, pressing a kiss to the back of my hand like we were standing in a ballroom instead of a dining room littered with paper napkins and passive aggression. I'll call you tomorrow. And just like that, he was gone out the front door, walking toward his bike like some modern-day gentleman who didn't need approval, only truth. The second the door clicked shut behind him, the room snapped back into its usual chaos. Mallory let out a low laugh. So, that was it. The big aristocrat fiancé. Jade fanned herself with her napkin like she'd just endured a heat wave. Honestly, I was expecting at least a blazer, or a full sentence about his trust fund. Maybe the money's all imaginary, Mallory added, like Monopoly cash. My mother began stacking the empty dessert bowls, shaking her head. He was nice, I suppose, but not exactly what we envisioned when you said well-bred. And that did it. I stood, heart pounding. My chair scraped loudly across the floor, the only sound louder than my shame. You didn't even try, I said, my voice shaking. Not one of you. They all paused. My father glanced up from his phone, blinking like he'd just realized I was still in the room. I took a step forward, gripping the back of my chair like it might hold me together. You didn't ask him a single real question. You didn't care about what he does or who he is. You just sat there waiting for proof that he was rich enough to be worth your attention. Mallory snorted. Oh, come on, Em, don't be dramatic. Dramatic? I repeated, stunned. You made it sound like he was some billionaire, Jade added with a shrug. You set the bar, we just walked in. I stared at them, blinking fast. I told you he was from a wealthy family. I didn't say he was flashy. I didn't say he'd be in a tuxedo holding a gold cane. Well, maybe you should've if you wanted us to be impressed, Mallory muttered. My father finally spoke, tone dry. You've always had a habit of overselling, Emily. And there it was. The statement that sliced right through every carefully stitched thread of dignity I'd tried to wear tonight, overselling like I'd hyped a product. Like Andrew was just another thing I was desperate to prove I deserved. I looked at my mother, hoping still, somehow for something, anything. But she only sighed. You can't expect people to adjust their expectations when you lead with theatrics. The room went blurry. My hands trembled as I gathered Andrew's empty wine glass just to keep them busy. I was afraid if I stood still too long I'd cry. You had one job tonight, I whispered. Just one, be kind. You brought a bike-riding farmer to dinner, Mallory replied, smirking. It's not like we didn't try to behave. My throat closed. The room felt suddenly too small, too loud, too everything. I dropped the wine glass in the sink and turned without another word. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't let them see me cry. Not tonight. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard my father chuckle behind me. He probably can't even afford Uber. The laughter that followed was sharp. Ugly. I didn't look back. I walked straight out the front door, letting it shut behind me and kept walking. Past the dying peonies. Past Andrew's tire tracks in the driveway. Past the voice in my head still trying to make excuses for them. The stars were barely visible through the city haze, but I looked up anyway. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I couldn't go back inside. Not tonight. Not like this. The next morning, the air felt thick, even in the cool breeze that drifted off Silver Lake. My hands trembled as I adjusted my coat sleeves, standing outside the cafe where Andrew and I often met on quiet weekends. It was early, barely 8, but I hadn't slept more than 2 hours. When he stepped out of the cafe carrying 2 mugs, one with a swirl of oat milk foam just the way I liked, my breath caught. He didn't look angry. He didn't even look tired. He just looked like Andrew. He handed me my coffee and sat on the bench beside me, glancing out at the lake, ducks skimming the surface in lazy zigzags. For a while, we didn't speak. He just sat with me, letting the silence work like a balm. Finally, I cleared my throat. About last night. You don't have to, he said gently, but I pushed forward anyway. No, I do. I wrapped both hands around my coffee. You were incredible and they were not, and I should have prepared you better, or I don't know, protected you. He turned to face me, his knee brushing mine. Emily, he said, and his voice was soft, it's just dinner. I looked up, surprised. His smile deepened. One awkward, borderline hostile, tinfoil-covered lasagna dinner doesn't undo everything we're building. A small laugh bubbled out of me, and I blinked against the sudden sting behind my eyes. He reached out, brushing a wind-blown strand of hair behind my ear. You're not responsible for their behavior, he said. You're responsible for you. And last night you were thoughtful, graceful, stronger than they even deserve to see. I swallowed hard. I just wanted them to see you the way I do. And maybe, he said, leaning back, they will or maybe they won't, but that doesn't change the way I see you. The lump in my throat made it hard to speak. I reached out and took his hand instead, grateful for its warmth and steadiness. He gave my fingers a squeeze. Next time, he said, we'll make dinner ours, not theirs. I tilted my head. Ours, he nodded, eyes twinkling. Your place, no burned lasagna, real plates, music, maybe a dog on the couch if I can talk you into fostering one. I laughed again, fuller this time. You always make it sound so simple. It is simple, he said. You love me, I love you, the rest, background noise. The words settled over me like a weighted blanket, grounding me after a night of chaos. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear it until then, not just that he wasn't upset, but that he saw me, that in the face of mockery, he still believed in us, unshaken. We sat in silence for a while, sipping coffee and watching the sun rise over the lake. Eventually, he nudged my shoulder. And for the record, yeah, I'd rather ride a bike to dinner with you than take a limo to meet anyone else's expectations. A tear slipped free, but I didn't bother hiding it. Because in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. The dinner had been a disaster, but we hadn't been. And that meant I still had something worth fighting for. The Malibu beach house stood tall against the late afternoon sun, its whitewashed exterior glowing like a postcard dream. Waves lapped rhythmically just beyond the deck, and the salty wind tangled my hair as I set down the last of the gift bags beside the sliding glass doors. Mallory's birthday. It wasn't my scene, but I came anyway. I always came. A part of me still hoped things would shift, soften. That one day they'd see me not as the extra sister or the one with unrealistic expectations, but someone who mattered just as much. Andrew was supposed to arrive by early evening. I told everyone he'd come for dinner and spend the night. He'd booked a nearby eco-hotel since there weren't enough bedrooms in the rental. I thought, maybe this time, with sand and sunset and slightly less burnt lasagna, things might go differently. He'll be here around 6, I said casually, unzipping a cooler of bottled drinks. Jade, stretched out on a chaise in a designer swimsuit and dramatic sunglasses, lifted her head just enough to deliver a smirk. Is he biking here again? She asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. My stomach clenched. Probably stopped to pick some wildflowers along PCH, Mallory chimed in, flipping her damp hair off her shoulder. Or maybe he's busy tending to his rooftop tomato plants. My dad chuckled from the grill. Better hope the wind doesn't blow him off his pedals. It's rough this time of day. The others laughed, their voices overlapping in a wave of mockery so familiar it no longer surprised me, but it still stung. I said nothing, just grabbed a drink and walked toward the edge of the deck. The view was stunning, an endless stretch of golden sand and water that shimmered like melted glass. Andrew had texted that morning, excited to see you. Dinner by the ocean sounds perfect. Don't worry, I'll bring charm, not a bike this time. I had smiled, told him I couldn't wait. But by 6:30 p.m. the jokes were still flying and Andrew still hadn't shown. I refreshed my messages for the 10th time, nothing. Mallory was opening gifts now, her voice fake coy as she unwrapped an envelope from Jade. A massage package. Oh wow, so original. They weren't watching me, which gave me a moment to slip away from the group and check my phone again, now with a pit forming in my stomach. Finally, a text buzzed in. Andrew, hey love, I'm so sorry. Something's come up with the nonprofit major donor issue we can't push. I won't make it tonight. I'll drive down early tomorrow. I promise I'll make it up to you. My heart sank. I stared at the message, rereading it, not because I didn't understand, but because I didn't know how to frame it to them. Back on the deck, I sat slowly, keeping my face neutral. Jade glanced over, reading me instantly like she always did. Well, she asked, her voice coated in expectation. Is our eco-hero circling the beach looking for a parking spot? He's not coming, I said quietly. He'll be here in the morning. Mallory let out a long, exaggerated sigh. Oh no, maybe his jet broke down. Or his bike chain snapped, Jade said, sipping her cocktail. You think he's building an electric scooter from scratch out of recycled ocean plastic? Even my mother joined in with a light laugh. At least tell him to bring muffins when he comes. We're a hungry bunch. No one noticed how tightly I was gripping my phone. No one noticed how I didn't laugh, or how I was forcing my breath to stay even. I smiled barely and said, "I'm sure he'll surprise you." But the truth was, I wasn't sure anymore what would surprise them. Their cruelty, their certainty that Andrew was beneath them, or that I'd keep showing up hoping they might stop. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the deck, and I sat there among them, holding my silence. Again. The next morning broke slowly, with the gentle hush of waves folding into the sand and the soft cries of seagulls circling above. The beach house smelled of old coffee and sunscreen. Empty wine glasses from last night still littered the patio, half-moons of lipstick stains visible in the soft morning sun. I was already on the deck, wrapped in a blanket, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm hours ago. No one else was talking much. The usual morning grumbles and throat clearing filled the space between sips. My mother sat by the railing, a glossy magazine open in her lap but untouched. Jade scrolled through her phone, tapping absently. Mallory was still in her sleep shirt, curled up like a cat in the corner seat with sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. They weren't teasing me today, but they weren't talking to me either. That was the rhythm with my family. When they didn't know how to punish you directly, they shut you out slowly. Quietly, like frost creeping over a window pane, I hadn't mentioned Andrew again. He had texted late last night, "Early start. No more delays, see you soon." That was it. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't want to hope again, not out loud. A seagull shrieked overhead, circling low near the dock just beyond the property. It caught my attention and then I heard it. A low, distant rumble. I glanced toward the water, confused. It wasn't the usual hum of fishing boats or weekend paddleboarders. It was deeper, steadier, like the growl of something too expensive to rush. Jade looked up next. "What's that?" My father stood, shading his eyes with his hand. We all turned toward the ocean. And then we saw it. Slicing across the soft blue horizon, sleek as glass and bright as polished bone, was a yacht. No, a yacht wasn't the right word. The yacht, massive, impossibly elegant. The kind of vessel that didn't just carry people, it announced them. Its white hull sparkled in the rising sun, cutting through the waves with effortless confidence. As it glided toward the private dock adjacent to the beach house, my breath caught. Jade stood abruptly, dropping her phone. Mallory's sunglasses slid down her nose. She pushed them back up with a shaky hand. "Is that?" she whispered. No one answered. We watched, all of us frozen, as the yacht eased into position with a smoothness that only came from the best engineering, or the hands of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. A deckhand, dressed in navy and white, leapt onto the dock, tying off the ropes with practiced precision. Another man stepped forward, straightening a linen tablecloth at the edge of the upper deck. Silver cutlery gleamed in the morning sun. A bottle of champagne sat in an ice bucket that sparkled like it had been carved from crystal. My mother blinked. Whose boat is that?" No one spoke. And then, as the anchor settled and the engine fell silent, the last figure stepped forward. Crisp white suit, no tie, brown curls wind-tossed and sunlit, calm smile. Hands tucked into his pockets like he had all the time in the world. "Andrew." Every head turned to me. I stood slowly. The blanket fell from my shoulders. No one said a word. Not Jade, not Mallory, not my mother. The only sound was the water, lapping quietly at the dock as if in applause. The dock creaked slightly under Andrew's steps as he walked toward us, the morning sun catching on the silver buckle of his watch and the perfectly pressed lapel of his jacket. He looked like he'd just stepped out of a movie, except this wasn't fiction, and every single person on that deck knew it. My sisters didn't move. My mother blinked as though she was trying to make sense of what her eyes were seeing. My father folded his arms across his chest, but I could see the shift in his posture, the barely hidden curiosity. Andrew stopped a few feet from us and smiled, effortlessly relaxed. "Sorry for the delay," he said. His voice cut through the stunned silence like a breeze slicing through fog. "Something came up yesterday, but I didn't want to miss the birthday." He turned toward Mallory and held out a small, carefully wrapped box. The paper was soft blue, tied with a cream satin ribbon. "Happy birthday, Mallory." She reached out slowly, like she wasn't sure if it was real. Her manicured fingers touched the box, but she didn't open it. She just stared at it, then back at him. "Thanks," she said quietly, the sarcasm finally drained from her voice. Andrew turned to the rest of them, as if this was all perfectly normal. "I know I was a bit of a mystery the other night," he said. Thought I'd bring lunch today and maybe give you a more accurate picture. Jade's mouth parted. You own that yacht, Andrew smiled. It's leased through my family's trust. I use it now and then for work events, donor meetings. He glanced at me with a wink. Or, in this case, overdue introductions. I heard my mother inhale sharply. Andrew gestured toward the ramp leading up to the yacht's deck. Lunch is ready if you're interested. There's champagne, fresh seafood, a few vegetarian dishes for Jade. Emily mentioned you've been cutting back. Jade's eyes widened. She told you that. I listen when she talks, Andrew said simply. No one moved at first. My family wasn't used to being speechless, but this took the air from them in a way no insult ever could. He hadn't come to prove anything. And yet, in doing nothing but being himself, he'd shattered their narrative. My father finally cleared his throat. You didn't have to go through all this. Andrew gave a slight shrug. It's just lunch. The same words he'd spoken to me in the cafe. I stepped down from the deck and stood beside him. He looked over and slipped his hand into mine. No performance, no grand gesture, just a quiet touch that said, "You were never wrong about me." "Shall we?" he asked the group. Still stunned, my family slowly began to move. Jade walked first, as if in a trance, followed by Mallory, who clutched the gift box like it might vanish. My mother walked stiffly, glancing back once at the house, as if unsure if she was allowed to step into a world she'd spent so long dismissing. I followed last, still hand in hand with Andrew. As we stepped onto the deck, a uniformed crew member offered flutes of champagne on a tray. My sisters accepted without a word. The table was already set, white linens, polished cutlery, chilled oysters, fruit garnishes that looked like they belonged in a food magazine. A soft jazz melody floated through hidden speakers. Mallory whispered under her breath, "Is this even real?" Andrew laughed softly. "Would you believe me if I said the chef was flown in from New York just this morning?" Mallory choked slightly, unsure if he was joking. He was, but he never clarified. I watched them all settle into their seats, still wide-eyed, still unsure where they now stood in the social hierarchy they had tried to control. And I stood beside the man they'd spent weeks mocking and realized with a quiet swell in my chest, this isn't just a twist, it's a shift. And I was exactly where I was meant to be. The yacht's dining salon was like something out of a dream, cool marble underfoot, soft linen drapes framing the sea-swept windows, and golden afternoon light spilling across a table set with sparkling glassware and polished silver platters. My family sat stiffly at first, still adjusting to the surreal setting. Their posture betrayed their discomfort, shoulders a bit too straight, eyes darting to each polished detail like they expected to find a hidden trick. Jade tapped her champagne flute once, then twice, as if testing whether it was real crystal. It was. Lunch was quiet at first. The kind of quiet where no one knew how to admit they'd been wrong. Andrew, as always, kept the energy light. He spoke to my mother about the coastline renovations his team had done in Monterey last spring. He asked Jade thoughtful questions about her real estate firm's expansion. Even Mallory, still gripping her birthday gift like it might vanish, was coaxed into a full, genuine laugh when Andrew retold the story of how I once got us lost hiking and insisted we were spiritually near the trail. They relaxed. Gradually, like butter softening in sunlight, but I could feel something shifting in the air. Andrew kept glancing at me, not in the casual way he usually did, but in that focused, steady way that made my heart beat faster, even after all this time. I didn't expect what happened next. The dessert course had just been cleared when Andrew rose from his seat. "Excuse me," he said softly, tapping his glass with the back of a fork. The room fell silent. My mother froze with her napkin in her lap. Jade leaned forward. Mallory blinked once, lips parting, and my chest tightened. Andrew stepped around the table, coming to stand before me. Then, without ceremony, without hesitation, he lowered himself onto one knee. "Emily Hartman," he began, his voice low but unwavering, "you've shown more grace than anyone I've ever met. You've walked through criticism, sarcasm, and silence and still kept your heart open, still fought for kindness." I couldn't breathe. "You've taught me what strength looks like when it's quiet," he continued, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "What loyalty means when no one's watching, and how love isn't about proving anything but choosing everything." He opened the box. The diamond inside caught the light and shattered it into color. A gasp rippled through the table. Even the ocean seemed to pause. "Will you marry me?" he asked. Time slowed. My family, the same people who had doubted, dismissed, and ridiculed, now sat frozen in place, their expressions unreadable. Jade's whisper broke the silence. "He's real," and then clink. Mallory dropped her fork. I looked at Andrew, my eyes were already wet. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, of course I will." He stood slowly, lifting the ring from the box and sliding it onto my trembling finger. As we embraced, the room didn't erupt in applause. There was no chorus of cheers, just stunned silence. And in that silence I found peace, because this wasn't a proposal for them. It wasn't a moment staged to win their approval. It was ours, and they just happened to be witnesses. Andrew kissed my forehead, then whispered, "You ready?" I smiled, still breathless. "For what?" He grinned. "For the rest of the surprise." Behind him, a steward stepped in and handed my father a new menu, engraved with gold lettering. Engagement brunch, Emily and Andrew. Mallory stared at it like it might combust in her hands. And I, for once, didn't shrink beneath their gaze. I stood tall, hand in hand with the man they once mocked, now unable to look away. 1 month later, I stood at the edge of a sun-drenched garden in Topanga Canyon, surrounded by wild flowers, hand-stitched linens, and a breeze that smelled like eucalyptus and citrus. Somewhere in the distance, wind chimes twinkled softly. Our wedding day. And somehow, despite everything that came before, it was perfect. Not because the flowers were perfectly arranged, though they were, or because the string quartet played the exact arrangement Andrew and I loved, though they did. It was perfect because, for once, everyone showed up with their hearts in the right place. Jade wore a dusty lavender gown, and for the first time in years, didn't treat the day like a performance. She actually cried during the ceremony, dabbing her eyes with the corner of her silk wrap. Mallory, in soft champagne chiffon, didn't roll her eyes even once. She gave a toast that began with a joke about Andrew's mysterious bicycle entrance, and ended with, "If I had to trust any man with my sister's future, I'm glad it's the one who surprised us all." My mother, who had once called Andrew impractical, stood beside me as I adjusted my veil, whispering, "You really did find someone extraordinary." And she said it like she meant it. Even my father, who had remained the most stoic throughout the entire whirlwind engagement, clasped Andrew's hand and muttered, "You've earned her, son." Andrew just smiled in that calm, unshakable way of his and replied, "She earned me first." The ceremony took place under a trellis strung with white peonies, vines of ivy curling around the beams as if nature itself was celebrating with us. When we said our vows, the air stood still, and I could feel every word root itself into the next chapter of my life. Afterward, laughter spilled like champagne through the garden. Kids chased bubbles across the lawn, old friends danced barefoot on the grass, and my family, my impossible, difficult, unyielding family, sat together at one long table, passing bread baskets and clinking glasses like they belonged to something bigger than themselves. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was begging to be seen. They saw me, they saw us. When Andrew lifted me onto the dance floor for our first dance, I felt light, truly light. The heaviness of past dinners, cold silences, biting sarcasm, all of it had melted into the sunset. "You happy?" he whispered as we swayed under string lights. I looked up at him, heart full. "I'm free," he smiled. "That's even better." The rest of the night flew by in a blur of music, hugs, and endless joy. When the cake was cut and the lights began to dim, I slipped off my heels and wandered to the edge of the garden alone, just to breathe in the moment one last time. That's when it hit me. A sudden wave of dizziness, like the ground had shifted under my feet. My vision dimmed at the edges. I reached for the trunk of a nearby olive tree, then everything went black. Voices blurred, footsteps rushed. "Emily, get help, she just collapsed." I felt hands catch me, someone shouting for water, for space. Andrew's voice cut through the confusion, low but urgent. "It's okay, I've got you." I wanted to respond, wanted to say I'm fine, it's nothing, but everything was slipping. All I could do was let go and trust that when I opened my eyes, he'd still be there. I came to on a cushioned bench near the garden path, the scent of jasmine and crushed grass grounding me before my vision fully returned. Cool hands cradled the back of my neck and familiar fingers brushed my forehead. "Andrew." "Easy," he murmured. "You fainted, just breathe." Guests hovered in a respectful circle nearby, hushed voices and rustling dresses in the dark. My mother crouched beside me, her eyes glossy. Jade hovered behind her, pale and anxious. Even Mallory looked genuinely rattled. Then came the doctor, thankfully a guest, an old friend of my parents. He knelt with a reassuring smile and touched my wrist gently. Vitals are solid, she's okay. Might have just been low blood sugar or excitement, or. He trailed off, then looked between me and Andrew, brows raised. Have either of you considered that you might be pregnant? The world tilted again, but for an entirely different reason. What? I blinked at him. He chuckled. Happens more than you think at weddings. Let's check to be sure. A moment later, in the privacy of the guest suite just off the garden, two pink lines confirmed what my heart was already whispering. Andrew stared at the test strip, then at me. And laughed, really laughed, breathless and overjoyed. We're having a baby, I nodded, eyes filling with tears. Looks like it. We walked back to the garden together, hand in hand. The news spread faster than the music could resume. People clapped, cheered, hugged, but the moment that stayed with me most, my mother stepping forward, speechless at first, then pulling me into the fiercest, most unexpected hug of my life. I'm so proud of you, she whispered through tears. So proud of who you've become. I looked around at my once critical family, Jade tearing up as she touched my arm, Mallory speechless for once, my father standing beside Andrew like he finally understood something no words could explain. And in that warm, buzzing space between what was and what finally is, I felt it. Not victory, not revenge, but something deeper, peace. The kind you earn. The kind no one can take from you again.